day.
It is a beautiful
October, and I'm not in a coat, and the sun is shining, so I'm great.
We're actually here at in Cape Cod in Orleans, having some great time at Gravity's house, and it made me think a little bit about when we were driving here. Like the lineage of my own experience, I'm sure yours and maybe even yours, of how we get from one place to the other. When I was a kid, I really looked forward to being on the trip with my family. My dad would hand me the AAA triptych and just turning the page and following that yellow line from page to page, and then
So it was like a map that had it like highlighted for you, right?
Yes.
An actual hard copy of a map.
Yep. And I had to, and I really looked forward to, there were no screens at that time, and we had to look out the window and look at the map. And I was, thinking about, oh my gosh, have we lost the art of map navigation with all of our smartphones? But even before smartphones, remember MapQuest?
Yes.
Like MapQuest, you went on your computer and put in your destination, and then you printed out the directions, and it was like 17 steps.
Yes.
And often, when you had your MapQuest in the car, at least for me, when we were living in New York, I didn't have a car, so every once in a while I would rent a car, and I would turn the page of the MapQuest, and I would inevitably end in like an alley or some way, because there wasn't like a GPS rerouting you. And I didn't have a smartphone, so I would,
You would get lost.
I was lost. I was lost in an alley trying to
Yeah.
And now I feel like, wow, just plugging in, I have a GPS app on my phone, and I can just plug in, and when I do take a wrong turn, magically, not so magically, reroutes me.
Yeah.
And so just that, it's interesting, but we could sit here and talk about maps all day, but it really does help me think about the idea of when we as teachers think about times in the year where we're navigating the whole year, and when we make a turn and end up accidentally getting lost, and what we could do to kind of prevent that idea of makes me help kind of think a little bit of like sitting down with my colleagues and kind of mapping out the whole year, feeling really solid about it, and then I took a turn.
Yeah.
In the midst, because I'm responding to students. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about that a little bit today.
Right, because when we're conferring with students during independent reading, I can think back in the beginning, like, I didn't even know where I was going, so how could I even have directions? So it was even like, we didn't even have any of those kinds of maps, because I didn't know where I was going. Like, I knew I wanted them to read, but like once they started to read, I was like, now what, right?
Yeah. You were in the state, but not sure where you wanted to go in the state.
Yeah. So then, like, I've been working with teachers a lot on saying, like, what does successful independent reading across the year look like? And when I asked that question at first, we would get answers that were like kind of like these rambling, getting lost kind of conversations. And then we'd list, like 180 things for 180 days, right? And then I was like, well, let's set a constraint. Like, could we in one hand with 5 fingers name those main instructional focuses that we wanted kids to focus on during independent reading that our instruction would focus on? And at first that seemed totally impossible. But we did it, right? And then you and I have started to replicate that and study that.
Absolutely. It makes me think of, so one, believe it or not, things can kind of get married, so to speak, more than we think they do. It also makes me think a little bit about just trusting your colleague. Like, okay, I'm teaching 3rd grade, you're teaching 4th grade. So if I stay on this roadmap and you stay on that roadmap, when students travel up,
yes,
so thinking about that
the
vertical
next leg of the journey.
Yeah. And so in that 5, that's a really good tip, right? If I could name, what are the 5 main teaching areas?
They're like our 5 main destinations.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. And then it makes me think a little bit about just the importance of, there's like making sure, like, what would happen if we alternated, like, one being fiction and one being nonfiction? So if we kind of just thought about across the year, do we really have a nice balance? That students really get exposure and opportunities to think as fiction readers and to think as nonfiction readers.
So you know what that's making me think about? When we had our first road trip ever, and we had no balance in our stops, right? Our destinations were Dairy Queen, right? And Starbucks. Right? And while it was fun, like, there was no balance, right, in our stops along the way, right? We probably should have stopped at like a farm to get a piece of fruit or something.
Right.
But I feel like the equivalent of that is when we only read fiction all year long, or a student only reads mystery or fantasy. Like, it's great that you love that. Like, I love a Frosty. Like, who doesn't? I love a chai latte. But it's not balanced. So this idea of making sure that the destinations along the way offer students enough experiences with fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah.
So if we were to think about like our 4 main tips, right, around these instructional focuses, like one is to alternate between fiction and nonfiction. And we tend to linger a little, like 4 to 6 weeks on fiction and then another 4 to 6 weeks on nonfiction, and alternating, because we want kids to read a variety of texts. And if we only spend a week or 2, they might only read 1 or 2 books.
Absolutely.
During that time. Something else that we talk about is this idea of making sure there is student choice. So we're all reading fiction, but we're not all reading the same book. And we often don't even need to all read the same genre of fiction or nonfiction. So like allowing for as much choice as possible within these focuses. And then you sort of named it before when you were talking about across grade levels. We also want to make sure we're having conversations and maybe even documents in front of us that map out how each grade level is going to build from year to year. Otherwise, it's like going on the same vacation every year and seeing the same exact sites, right? Like we might go to the same place, like we might go to Cape Cod every year, but we don't have to go to the same mini golf place. We don't have to go to the exact same beach. We could try out some new restaurants.
I also feel like it's more we than me. Right, like we as a team can spend more time collaborating when we have these things align, and then kids, they're our students versus my students. Like I'm looking out for the students so that they have these rite of passage experiences across their years, versus like go to the same darn Dairy Queen every time.
Right. So we're going to be posting some more resources on Facebook, but maybe the sort of challenge for all of us is that question of like, can you name on one hand the 5 main instructional focuses you have across the year when it comes to independent reading? And what would it be like if you collapse them to just 5 of the most core important ones?